Hello, everybody, and welcome to this, the latest edition of the Rewatch Project with Hannah and Mike. I am Mike, and with me, as always, bloody Hannah. How you doing?
Can't get rid of me.
Yeah, with me. It's all about emphasis, isn't it?
Always.
And with me, as always, we are back in the world of Babylon 5. We have been away for a little while. Apologies, life has been crazy. But please, Hannah, do tell our gentle listeners, what are we talking about this evening?
Tonight we are talking about episode number 5 of season 1, namely The Parliament of Dreams.
She did that right off the top of her head.
Synopsis says, a week-long cultural festival takes place. IMDb, you need some work. A week-long cultural festival takes place on board the station. Catherine Sakai, Sinclair's old girlfriend, arrives on the station and Jakar receives a death threat.
Yeah.
It is directed by Jim Johnston and written by your friend of mine, JMS.
Cool. Okay, so we have showrunner writing this episode, although he will go on. It will become a bit of a David Lynch, Mark Frost thing after a while because JMS is not the best delegator in the world, I would say. So
there's been a lot of story editing from Larry DiTilio, who's the only other person who has written an episode thus far.
IMDb's weird with writers, though, because most shows have story editors, but it's an administrative role, essentially. So it's weird that IMDb actually credits them as writers.
Well, you don't know what's involved.
No, but I mean, basically what they do is they will go through it and they just make edits for time. So it might be, he'll be like, oh, okay, hang on, we're going to have the end of part 15 minutes
cut
in.
a minute out.
Could you move the order of scenes? So it's an incredible skill. I'm not taking anything away from it, but it's not a writing credit, really. You know, that's like crediting your administrative person at work for creative decisions. They're doing what they're told.
Well, you know, I'm a typesetter, so I am the administrative version of a graphic designer. So
but
I'm like a story editor.
Yeah, you're a tracer. Just say it. So anyway, before we get into a domestic dispute, we will remind you.
We love each other, really.
We do. Off camera, it's just it's all puppies and rainbows. So yes, quick reminder that we do appreciate feedback, which you can send us at rewatchprojectpodcast@gmail.com. Alternatively, you can leave comments right here on this channel, and we will read those out. Excellent. If they feel appropriate to do so. And also do check out our friend shows, namely Chin Stroker versus Punter, his film, her movie. Actually, I'm going to stop saying his film, her movie, because they haven't done it for any episodes for a really long time. So I would advise you, or maybe go check out back catalogue episodes. That's the last shout out they're getting until they resuscitate that podcast. So do check out Chin Stroker versus Punter.
Get it together, guys.
Exactly. Film Bastards, The Good, the Bad, and the Odd, Talk Without Rhythm podcast, and Entertainment Landfill, which I'm also going to have to stop mentioning soon because I haven't put anything out for a while. All that remains to be said is that we also do appreciate reviews on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and do like and subscribe. The more subscriptions we have, the more it raises the profile of the channel on YouTube. The more people contribute and give feedback, which is ultimately what this is all about, and is a powerful motivator for us doing these with a greater level of regularity, because we are nothing if not regular, I would say. Just not in the podcasting sense, unfortunately.
I'd just like you to know, though, we've been working overtime all week, yet we're still carving out time for this today.
Yes, I did a 12-hour day today, but we are here. We are podcasting.
Well, we love Babylon 5 as well, we really want to share it with you guys.
Yes,
so
we do, and we're very aware of the fact that we're still very early in the show, and we have yet, I guess, to kind of build momentum with this rewatch. So we're going to make an effort to do that.
Just on that tip, actually, for anyone who's new to our channel because of Babylon 5, just know we're not going to fade out halfway through the season or series.
No, we are completionists.
Yeah. So even if life gets busy and it takes us, a few days to get to the next episode, or a week, or however long, we will get to it.
Also,
so just don't worry.
It's a bit of a case of feast or famine as well. When we're covering Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., I think the longest gap, we had a gap of nearly a month at one point, but then we had other weeks where we'd do 3.
That also coincided with when I stopped drinking.
Yes, exactly. So,
and I needed something to occupy my time, so we podcast a lot.
Yeah, exactly. So if we suddenly start podcasting even more, then you know that another vice, sugar, has probably gone or something like that. At this point.
Please don't let me give up my beloved caffeine.
No, that would be unwise.
That's a step too far.
Yeah.
I've still got children. I need to be awake.
And also, we do accept donations for the channel via PayPal. But as is always the case, please do not do so if donating would cause you any financial hardship. Certainly do not want that. Hannah, you mentioned we've got a few comments on YouTube. Yeah. Do you want to get to those before we watch this episode of B5?
Sure. We've got a voicemail from our buddy Mark.
Oh, I didn't know that.
But I think, first of all, I'll read through the YouTube comments that we've got and then finish on Mark's voicemail.
Cool. Okay.
Right. So, our regular contributor, Mike's Musings, on episode 4, Infection, he says, this episode was actually the first one produced.
Wow.
So they were still finding their footing. That's actually really interesting to know, because you would think 4 in that it wouldn't be the first one to have gone through that process.
The only thing was, I felt that Garibaldi was a little bit off in that episode. So I think maybe there was a bit of, and it's funny because the original Star Trek was the same, was that they shot the episodes but they broadcast them out of order. The first 5 or 6, and it really shows when you watch them in broadcast order. It feels like the characters regress.
Yeah.
But when you watch them in the shooting order, which is the best way to watch them, it feels like they're evolving.
Yeah.
You know?
Now we've got one from FSM Dog.
Okay. What's up, Doug?
What's up, Doug? They say, yep, a very standalone episode. This is again on episode 4, Infection. Yeah. Yep, a very standalone episode. Tough to have continuity in the first real episode. Bringing in a known face will help to find an audience who will see the name and think this might be good.
Yeah.
Very, very true.
Yeah,
and quite right as well. But, he was great.
But particularly a genre actor as well, somebody associated with science fiction.
Our regular Mike Feedbacker also says, Star Trek feels like it's for teenagers to me now, where Babylon 5 is more adult level. I'd agree with that.
Well, I kind of felt that way a little bit at the time, mate, but I think it was more just that Star Trek in the 90s was coming from an older tradition of television, which originated obviously from the 60s Star Trek, but also that came from anthology shows like The Twilight Zone. And whereas Babylon 5 really, in many ways, came out of shows like Twin Peaks that were experimenting with longer form storytelling. And I think that's a big difference.
I wonder whether the difference in feeling, certainly from my point of view, Star Trek does feel more teenagery, childlike, in the sense that it's quite...
It's idealistic.
Utopian.
Yeah.
So yeah, very idealistic.
Well,
and that is the way that kids and teenagers think about the world. It's from a very idealized point of view, generally.
Whereas
Babylon 5 is far more adult in the sense that it's more realistic to how Earth is.
The big difference with Babylon 5 is somebody has to clean the toilets.
Yeah, and there's money, and there's power struggles, and there's political issues.
The other big difference as well was that Star Trek was made at a time when there were certain things that you couldn't talk about on television. So Star Trek had to lean into allegory, whereas Babylon 5 had the luxury of coming out at a time when, the 1990s seems unevolved to us now. But you could have gay characters on television, whereas you could talk openly about racism. Star Trek had to give those attributes to aliens because you couldn't talk about it. So I don't think it's necessarily that Star Trek was in any way adolescent, But I do think that you've hit the
Probably
nail
have
on the head.
more constraints.
There's more constraints, but also I think it is about idealism, and I think that you can attribute idealism to youthful naivety, but I don't think that's the case.
Properly.
But I don't
naivete.
but I don't think that's necessarily the case. I don't think that Gene Roddenberry was coming from a place of naivety. I mean, he was an ex-policeman. He was in the military. He saw shit.
I don't think it's naivety. I think it's wishful thinking.
Yeah. Well, no, I don't even think it's wishful thinking. I think that Gene Roddenberry genuinely believed that people were great. And I remember the example he always gave was he said he got really angry when people talked about, the whole ancient aliens thing, the idea that the pyramids were made by aliens. He said the pyramids weren't made by aliens. They were made by people because people are incredible and clever and resourceful, and they figured out a way of doing it. So let's not credit aliens with something like that. And I think that there's an element of, it's not about wish fulfillment. It's about making things happen. It's kind of like if you go into something with positivity, you will generally get a positive outcome. If you leave the house convinced that you're going to die that day, you will find some way to end up in front of a car. It's self-fulfilling prophecy. And I always felt that with Star Trek, it wasn't like wouldn't it be nice? It was let's make this happen by role modeling this and inspiring it. And to a certain extent, it's worked. There are female astronauts who became astronauts because they saw characters in Star Trek and that inspired them and they made it happen. So I get where it's coming from. And I think that in some ways I don't even want to call it maturity, because I think in some ways Babylon 5 is actually less sophisticated than Star Trek. I think they're just different. But I think that their similarities are many enough to encourage those kinds of Star Wars versus Star Trek, Blur versus Oasis, Beatles versus Stones conversations a little bit.
I mean, I think there's room for both in the world. It's just I do agree with that statement that Babylon 5 has a more adult view of the world.
I think that also it's worth remembering that JMS was obsessed with Star Trek. I mean, you'll see soon multiple people from Star Trek getting cast in it. But at the same time, he was a bit pissed off about the whole Deep Space Nine thing at the time as well. Yeah. So there was complexity there. Anyway, so no, great food for thought though.
Yeah. We have a new subscriber. I'm pretty sure his username is spelling Cool Daddy.
Wow.
With
that's me. Sorry about that.
K001 Daddy.
Yeah.
I love it.
word.
Subscribed for the B5 content, watched it when it aired many more times since, and now a good chunk of my YouTube watch time is B5 reactions.
Excellent. Well, glad to be one of them.
Hopefully we are living up to whatever else you're watching.
Yeah.
Thank you to everyone who has commented on our videos. We really appreciate it.
Yes, please continue to do so.
Okay, we're going to finish on a voicemail from our good buddy Mark.
Okay.
This is his Babbling 5 episode on episodes 3 and 4.
Cool.
Hi, Mike. Hi, Hannah. Design Mark. I thought I'd send you a little feedback on Babylon 5. Okay, a couple of episodes I want to talk about. The last two I watched, in fact. Episode 3 and 4 of season 1, which is, Born to the Purple and Infection. Born to the Purple, I thought it was a really interesting one. I really liked it. There was a complexity to Rondo's character that I thought was really interesting. And I like the work done by Fabiana Udenio, who I keep thinking is Salma Hayek. I just do. And I know her probably best from Austin Powers movies. I think she plays a lot of vagina. She's very good in this. And she's got a lot of energy and talent in this, and it's kind of shining through. And her vibe, her energy is quite similar to Salma Hayek's. That's probably part, and the fact she also looks like her kind of just.
She's got that similar
I like this one.
vim.
This to
about it.
me gave Peter Jurassic a real chance to shine, and he took it and he did it. I really like the fact it wasn't a angry man gets angrier kind of thing. He kind of realised how it was all going, and he was resigned to it. In many respects, this feels like Babylon 5 doing Casablanca. He reminded me most of Rick from Casablanca. There were a few other sort of actors and characters he also
things are the way they are
from other movies. I'm trying to think of some where basically a world-weary person kind of says, okay, that's the way it is, I understand. There's some actors that do underplay and have this kind of sort of character, tired of the world and kind of not giving up, but just kind of accepting how life is in a really, really good way. And Londo, Jurassic really presents it well here, and I liked it. I'm thinking of there's a few performances, for example, by John Malkovich, where when he underplays, he's really good at underplaying. Is John Malkovich.
Dangerously aging.
He can do broad as well, and for comic effect, that's fine. But when he's kind of being sort of quiet and sort of reflective, he does it really well. There's a slightly obscure poker movie called Rounders where he plays a character called Teddy KGB, and near the end, when he knows he's beaten someone, he doesn't glow, he doesn't crow, he kind of goes, that's enough.
So Matt Damon.
And Londo kind of reminded me of that. And weirdly enough, this kind of reminds me, there's an aspect of Christopher Lloyd's performance in Star Trek 3. He's the Klingon. And Christopher Lloyd doesn't get any much credit for this, but he basically created how Klingons are in that movie. How we know Klingons from Next Generation onwards. Christopher Lloyd's doing that. And there's a bit near the end where he thinks he's beaten Kirk, where Kirk goes, can I have a few minutes? He says, can I have a minute, please? And he goes, take 2. And he's kind of not gloating, he's not crowing, he just understands a man has been beaten and there's nothing really to celebrate there apart
watched that recently, didn't we?
He's done what he had to do. And Londo's kind of like that in this. And like I say, I think this is Babylon 5 doing Casablanca somewhat. And I thought it was rather good. Weirdly, I rewatched the movie Tron recently, and I can't recall seeing Peter Jurassic in any other movie. And he's in Tron.
There's more Babylon 5 connections to Tron coming
he plays
soon.
One of the programs called Prom, I think, who doesn't last very long. But it was kind of, that's that guy, as I was watching it. Yeah. The other episode, Infection, was a more straightforward adventure story. But you know what? It really reminded me of the original story for the first Quatermass TV series. Not necessarily the movie, but the first, because at the end of that,
sci-fi
the
influence.
Doctor, Quatermass overcomes this enemy from space by actually appealing to its humanity and getting it to understand what it might do to the rest of humanity if it continues on this path, rather than in the movie it gets electrocuted. It's a much more grand thing. And in fact, there was a Quatermass sort of redo on Channel 4, a live event involving Joseph Fleming and David Tennant before he was the Doctor. And that used much more of the original script, and it's kind of got an ending a bit like this. This appeal to the humanity in someone who is obviously on a destructive path, possessed, as it were. It's kind of interesting, and it just made me think of it. It's just a few thoughts on this. This was really enjoying Babylon 5. It's coming along very nicely, and weirdly, I'm also in parallel watching Deep Space Nine Season 5 too. So I'm kind of watching 2 space stations at the same time. So there you go. So keep up the good work. It's signing off as Mark, your constant listener. Bye for now.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, constant listener. It's
Thank
so funny.
you.
There's so many things in that voicemail where I'm like, just you wait and see. Because Peter Jurassic, yes, was in Tron. But another quite main character in the film Tron, or actor in the film Tron, will come into Babylon 5 in quite a prominent role. And they share scenes in the film Tron as well, so it's quite funny when you go back and see Tron. There, you're like, it's those guys. And also when Mark mentions character development for Londo, I'll just say there is more of that.
Indeed. And let us know your thoughts on Deep Space Nine versus Babylon 5. If you're watching it at the same time, it'd be interesting to hear what you think.
It's like a Patricia Tallman fest, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, I really, and it's funny because, I mean, not only are they two space shows, but you're watching two shows that were, contemporaneous.
Mm.
So you'll be living in the night. I mean, Christ, why don't you watch Seinfeld as well, and just go for, and Murphy Brown and just go full 90s and see what happens.
And then move on to Mad About You and Friends.
Yeah. And I will also mention, it's funny that you mentioned Quatermass because I'm surprised that Mark didn't mention David McCullum, actually, because he's, again, stalwart of British science fiction, like Sapphire and Steel and a bunch of other things. But British science fiction is a really big influence on Babylon 5, particularly, and I think episode 6 or 7, Mind War, you'll start to see very explicit references to The Prisoner, which I know Mark's just recently rewatched, and that's a real deep cut sci-fi show for it to be referencing. So really glad to have you along for the ride, Mark, and looking forward to hearing more of your sort of untainted, virginal perspective on B5. But
cool.
So we're going to hit pause. We're going to watch Parliament of Dreams. And then we will come back and give you our immediate reaction upon completion of that episode, not of anything sexy. Sorry, the word completion is just completely ruined for me now.
Don't ever use the word completion when you refer to anything sexy.
Let me rephrase that. Upon the happy ending of this episode. I did it again. Okay. At the climax of this episode of Babylon. Okay, I'm going to stop talking. We're going to watch some Babylon 5 and we'll be back shortly. And we are back. So we've just finished watching Parliament of Dreams, the 5th episode, is it?
5 of B5.
Number 5 of B5. Hannah, initial thoughts?
Was ruddy bloody good.
Ruddy bloody good.
I very much enjoyed it. And just give me a second, because I really enjoyed this episode. I thought it was great. It had a good mix of standalone and world building. I like getting back to the alien characters. We haven't seen Jakar really for a couple of episodes.
And we've certainly never seen them kind of together.
Yeah.
As well, which is an important part of the show.
And the premise of the, celebrating the different customs and ceremonies for each country, or each people species, is kind of a good way to get them all together.
Yeah, and also something that had never occurred to me before. Is it's a really good device for that world building. It's a really good way of delivering exposition about the history of the different races and what they're like. It's a good device, and I think that it makes sense within the narrative of the show because, of course, part of the mandate of Babylon 5 as a station is to celebrate diversity. But, of course, the danger with celebrating diversity is that it can end up being divisive and causing conflict and causing problems. And, I've said before about one of the things I like about Sinclair is just how, a lot of episodes end with him just being like, oh, God, what a day. And as somebody who is a manager of people, you do often get that, can't people just stop? And just be reasonable, and and he basically runs a gigantic city-sized United Nations.
Yeah,
which is just going to be an impossible job.
Just a constant argument.
Yeah, so to throw in celebrations of diversity, because diversity is great, but also ultimately what diversity is differences. And that can be a positive thing, but of course it can be a divisive thing as well. So it makes sense within the show that the station, and one of the tensions of Babylon 5 is, will Babylon 5 work? You know, its intention is it's to bring these people together and to create,
and it's still quite experimental.
Yeah, it's a home away from home, but it can be a dangerous place, unfortunately. And the fact that that's so intrinsic to the show tricks you into not realizing that what they're doing in this episode is just giving you loads of information about how these different societies function, because it's doing it in.
I love the way that this Centauri celebration is just everybody's going to
wankered,
absolutely get pissed and eat way too much.
Well, it's like Romans, isn't it?
Well, it is.
Like when they're talking about how you binge and then purge, it's like the Roman vomitoriums.
Do they ever explain why some Centauri men have really big, half moon hairs?
It's like it's a status thing, I think.
Yeah,
because it's peacocks, basically, isn't it?
Yeah,
but I think it is a status.
But is it thing. So if you're a lower status, do you have to keep your hair trimmed far more often to keep it smaller?
I'm not sure. There's a thing later on where, actually, no, that's a spoiler, but a character starts wearing their hair shorter, and Londo's really offended by it, and they're like, "Oh, it's how the young people are wearing it now."
Oh,
and he's like, "So I think it's more a symbol of tradition,
right,
than just the bigger your hair, the more status you've got. I think it's more you're kind of wearing your patriotism on your sleeve by doing that."
And conversely to the Centauri celebration, it was ceremony. The Minbari one being so somber and serious and
ritualistic,
very, very ritualistic and process driven, kind of says a lot about how they are as well.
The other thing I really liked about this character is, I think in some ways it's probably the most purely entertaining episode so far. Like it lets all of the characters have fun. This
is probably the first episode where I've actually had a few chuckles out loud watching it. The hot pink undies in Jakar's room.
Well, and just lots of Jakar's reactions to things. And, so there are,
and Londo saying that he's stunning in purple.
Yeah. Well, it's the fact that they've realised that you can get humour out of Jakar. That Jakar is camp,
and the way he's like, when he gets all annoyed about something, I love it.
And he gets scandalised. It's like, He's sort of like almost like a Walter Matthau-y kind of harump thing, that he does. But I mean, also, and we'll get to this in the spoiler section, there is foreshadowing of stuff here as well.
Yeah.
But I just feel like a lot of the actors really find their characters in this episode. I feel like Mira Furlan really finds Delenn.
I think her strength is starting to show, like
the complexity of a character. Like she's really, like with Linnea, she's really loving and nurturing. But when she needs to be, she's deadly serious as well.
Well, yeah, and looks like she could take you down at the drop of a hat.
Yeah.
And you can tell that he knows that.
Yeah.
I always think he looks a bit like Seth Green.
Yeah, he does look. He looks a lot like Seth Green, and it's worth mentioning because this is the introduction of Linnea, who is an ongoing character. I mean, his name's on the opening credits, but this is another example of JMS's kind of sense of whimsy when it comes to casting, because he's played by Bill Mumy, who was the little Will Robinson in Lost in Space. He's the young boy, but also famously. And I think people always talk about JMS casting him because he was in Lost in Space. And the woman who plays his mother, the mum in Lost in Space, comes into Babylon 5 later. But I think it's also mainly he was in and this is one for you, Mark, he was in a very famous episode of The Twilight Zone. It's one that The Simpsons parodied where he's a small child, but he's omnipotent and he can do anything. And everyone's scared of him and they don't want to upset him. Like the parents are like serving him dinner and are terrified. It's a very memorable episode of that. So he was in that as well. So it's another example of you get these sci-fi TV shows that loves to do that. Like Stargate's a great example of that, the TV show. The showrunners of that were big sci-fi fans. And the amount of Star Trek alumni, the two leads from Farscape, Ben Browder and Claudia Black, they come into Stargate and are both in the show at the same time together for a whole run of episodes as well. So there's a tradition in sci-fi of bringing in sci-fi people, you know, and this is another good example of that.
And I think there's a very specific style of acting that works well with sci-fi.
It is.
Especially stage acting. You think about Patrick Stewart.
Yeah. William Shatner.
William Shatner. I was trying to think of his name for a minute. I was kirking all over the place.
You're spirking cock. You're spirking all over the place. Is that very nice? But the thing is, and you're right though. It is. I remember seeing an interview with Brannon Braga, one of the head writers in 90s Star Trek, and he was talking about how he's like making Star Trek's really hard. He's like, because it's such a specific tone. He said it's kind of it's sort of camp, but not.
Yeah. It's
part historical fiction in tone. You know, like a lot of Star Trek feels like almost like Jane Austen or historical fiction. It's got that kind of tone to it in some ways. But it's also adventure, and it's kind of a hard to define thing. So I get that if you've got people who are good at that.
It's very master and commander.
It is. And also, a lot of the time, the shows aren't, even Star Trek, aren't huge budgets. So you have to have actors who are capable of being able to just come in, memorize a shit ton of dialogue, hit their marks, and just deliver. Not even necessarily give great performances, but just get the job done. And I think that people who have experienced the workloads of, genre TV shows are just frigging pros, basically. And I think that's what you need.
But also, I think, especially when it comes to the alien characters, being able to convey multiple emotions through makeup is such a specifically hard skill.
And being able to convey a sense of being alien, but to do it in a way that's recognizable and relatable to an audience is a bit of a tightrope walk as well.
Well, it's like, who's the guy in Star Trek Discovery? Real famous.
Doug Jones.
Yeah. Like the amount of prosthetics that he has to wear, to play. I can't even remember his character's name. Saru, that's right. And he manages to connect you to his experience.
Jeffrey Combs is another good person who's pretty good at that.
Jeffrey Combs. Mark will be experiencing him at the moment in good old DS9.
Yeah. I mean, he plays so many characters in Star Trek that there's one episode of Deep Space Nine where he's playing two characters. Like they're in the same scene together, and you wouldn't even know it because they've got he's playing a Ferengi and he's playing like Wayoon, I think it is.
Yeah.
And he played those characters separately, but in this episode, they're in scenes together, and the writers must have been like, shit, can we do that? Can we, but it's just the way it works out. It wasn't like a gimmick, like, oh, let's do an episode. It was just those two characters just happened to interact in this episode, and they were both played by Jeffrey Combs, It's
not like that comedian who did Kenny Rogers and Dolly Parton singing Islands in the Stream just on his own.
No. The other thing that I liked about this episode as well, it had that kind of reassuringly 90s A plot, B plot kind of thing.
Yeah.
You'd got, in fact, there was three, really. You had the stuff with Sinclair. You had the romance, don't touch me unless you mean it. You didn't mean that. She meant that one. There is a difference. And you've got the Jakar plot, which is like a fun, rompy plot. But also you've got all the stuff with the ceremonies and the belief systems and all that kind of stuff. But you've also got the introduction of Natoth and the introduction of Lanier as well.
And it was lovely to see their relationship kind of come together and solidify.
Yeah, they're sort of patting each other on the back and chuckling away together by the end, aren't they?
That's lovely, though, because I think there's a lot to be said between each ambassador and their attaché.
Yeah.
Because they all become they are all very significant to each of their...
It's the Jiminy Cricket thing, isn't it, in some ways? You know, like they're a point of contrast, and it gives them someone to talk to, because we need that. You need to have that dialogue.
Someone to confide in. Yeah. So when they're like really wanting to expedite what they're feeling, you know,
and thinking.
Yeah, they can do that through their assistant.
And you know, it fleshes out the cast as well, and also both actors are just great in the role as well. Caitlin Brown, I think her name is. She's another great prosthetics actor. She's played multiple characters in Star Trek. Usually, she was Worf's wife in Next Gen.
Worf's wife.
Worf's wife, and you know, so she's somebody who's got a great history, and she's got a great physicality to her, and he's just a really great actor.
Yeah.
And Bill Mumy just brings a kind of likable sense of reverence. And it really elevates the way we as the audience view Delenn. Because that's the other thing that having these attachés does, is it gives us a perspective to view these characters through. And the perspective of Lanier is sort of fear and reverence, but also he's surprised when she lets him look at her.
And not use Sakai.
Yeah. And again, that's another opportunity for them to bring that mystery back in. And that really comes in the coming sort of few episodes as well. Yeah. So I think it's a really good move, you know, in the same way that, you know, things like the captain's log in Star Trek is a way of a device for getting the inner thoughts of the captains. I think having these attachés who weren't in it from the beginning. So I get the feeling that this was a creative decision that was made, because Veer wasn't in the pilot. You know, Lanier and Natoff didn't come in until later episodes. So I think that this was a realization that JMS had, that you needed that, you know, for all of those reasons.
Yeah.
And also, I think this episode's just got some really memorable little moments in it as well. The, you know, you will know fear, you will know pain, and then you will die. Enjoy the trip, kind of, you know, all of that stuff. So yeah, I think this episode really works. I mean, there's a couple of corny moments in it. The romance stuff doesn't really work. That feels like a plot device, and they haven't really got any chemistry. But
Sinclair's, he's not a romance person.
No, he's not. But
they do try.
Yeah, well, I think there's plot reasons.
Yeah.
Why they need to do that, but I just don't think that the actors. He's too much of a kind of paternal presence to be able to do that. And also, I think one of the things as well was in the 90s, particularly the early 90s, this changes. You see this change occur because when Babylon 5 started in 93, and it runs, because there was a gap between the pilot and the show, it runs through to the late 90s. So you really do see changes in the way that televisual storytelling happens. And it's not just going from standalones to story arcs. It's just in acting styles and writing styles. And in the early 90s, there was still this very prosaic, almost Mills and Boone-esque way of romance working. You know, it was very much rose petals on red bed sheets and kind of, oh, you left me that morning, and who broke who up with who. You know, it's a very kind of
touch me and listen.
Yeah. It's a kind of airport paperback, Jackie Collins kind of style, and it is what it is. But I don't think that you're meant to be emotionally invested in this relationship. I think it's very much a genre trope combined with a storytelling need, which will become apparent as the season goes on. But I think that's the element of the episode that probably works the least for me and makes me roll my eyes and, oh, bless you, 1994. It was a simpler time. But at the same time, I don't think it actually really matters.
No.
Because, you know, you can just enjoy the fact that that was what the style was at the time, and appreciate it on a nostalgic level. But also, it's not terribly important, I don't think.
No.
Well, I feel like we've actually covered this off pretty well. Is there any other main points you want to cover, Hannah? I feel like we've hit most of the plot points. Oh, one thing I do want to mention. Sorry, I love how much Ivanova is enjoying herself with Londo, and I think that one of the things that Babylon 5 does really well is giving unexpected dimensions to characters to make them more three-dimensional, because nobody is one way all the time.
No.
And in the same way that up until this point, and this episode does this a few times actually, up until this point, Jakar has his entire function has been to be a mustache-twirling villain.
Baddie.
And in this episode, we've seen him be vulnerable, we've seen him be scared, we've seen him be funny, we've seen him be quite likable. So this episode changes that. We've also seeing Londo just being crazed. We see a darkness to Delenn that we haven't seen before. And I think that the show continues to not allow characters to be defined by one trait.
Yeah. That we're a mixture of all different emotions and different behaviors.
Yeah.
And I guess one thing the show becomes very good at is showing that flux in character. You know, you're rooting for one at one stage and rooting for another at another stage. You know, and it very much does take the viewer on a journey, as much as I hate that phrase.
And I think that they realised, and it must be interesting for Mark watching Deep Space Nine at the same time, is that if you've got a show, particularly a science fiction show, you know, and science fiction or space opera was very much defined by Star Trek, which was about boldly going, you know. And when Deep Space Nine came out, people made fun of it. It's like, well, they're not going anywhere. People are coming to them. And what Deep Space Nine realised, and we're seeing that happening here on Babylon 5, is that if you're going to have a static concept of a show, you have to have a large ensemble. So if you look at a show like Farscape, for example, that's got a smaller cast because they're going
somewhere.
So that makes sense. But if you're staying somewhere, then you have to have a large ensemble because you need to move. The movement comes from the movement between characters.
Yeah, and there has to be new, unforced discourse.
Yeah, and different character dynamics and interaction configurations, because they can't go to another planet and interact with these other people. So you've got to be able to have greater levels of malleability. And I think that the realization of expanding the cast here with Lanier, it's a bit like what happened on Deep Space Nine with you know, characters like Rom and Lita and Garak, you know, and I don't think that would have happened that didn't happen on shows like Enterprise or Voyager, or you had a few people come in, but you didn't see the cast nearly double in size, which is what happened on these shows after a few episodes, you know. But any other final thoughts, Hannah, before we go on to spoiler section?
Shall I talk about the next episode before we do that?
Yes, please do. What's the next episode?
So the next episode we will be covering is Mind War.
Oh, this is a good one.
Synopsis says the Psychops arrive at the station to capture Talia's old Psy-Corps instructor. Catherine is warned not to survey a sector of space by Jakar.
Oh, yes.
It is directed by Bruce Seth Green, and
who very recently passed away,
and written by JMS.
Yeah, so this is a very much a mythology enriching episode. So I'm looking forward to that. Okay, so we will be back very soon to talk about that. We're back even sooner to do some spoilers for those of you who watched Babylon 5 before. Quick reminder that we appreciate feedback. Rewatch Project podcast@gmail.com, or leave comments here on the channel. Likes and subscribes, very much appreciated. Also, do check out our friend shows and positive reviews on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Also, we very much appreciate donations to help us with the upkeep of the show, but please do not do so if that would cause you any financial hardship. So we're going to take a very quick break and then come back and do some spoiler talk. A couple of interesting things here is, obviously, things on the show changed as actors became available or unavailable. And we start to see a bit of that here because clearly the actress who played Carolyn in the pilot wasn't available.
Yeah.
Or they didn't like her or whatever. So they've created this new character. But they've both got similar jobs.
Yeah.
So it's like...
Either he's really into mining chicks.
Yeah. They're both off surveying.
Surveys.
So you can see that obviously there's a need for that character to be doing something. And it's what I've said before, it's what JMS called trapdoors. He said he had a trapdoor for every character because he knew when you film a show over 5 years, things can happen.
Things change.
I mean, another one of them, of course, is Sinclair will leave the show. That was never the plan. There was, behind the scenes, like health issues for the actor. And he's replaced by Bruce Boxleitner. And that's the Tron connection. Bruce Boxleitner played Tron in Tron with Peter Jurassic.
Mark's never going to hear this.
No, I know. Obviously, Sheridan, the Bruce Boxleitner character, will get together with Delenn. And that originally, though, it was going to be Sinclair. And they're foreshadowing that a little bit, I think, with the marriage thing. This idea that there's some kind of connection between them is part of what the original plan of the show was. Because the whole idea was the whole of Babylon 5, the end of season 5, was going to end with Sinclair becoming Valen.
Right.
So they rejigged it a little bit and gave Sheridan a different ending and just gave Sinclair his Valen ending earlier in the show. So it is interesting seeing these things getting set up. Talia and Lita are another one of those. Yeah. So it is fun keeping track of these things. And I've got it's actually the bookcase in the other room, this really good behind the scenes book on Babylon 5 that kind of takes you through what the original plan was and why it changed and the behind the scenes stuff and how they figured it out. It's a fascinating process. So there's a lot of that stuff going on. And it's interesting, of course, seeing Lanier come in as well because he'll have this sort of big character arc as well. But any other spoiler stuff you want to mention?
Yeah, Jakar not crying out in pain.
Yeah, that comes back later, doesn't it? Yeah,
I mean the scene, the when he's tortured by that Centauri, it's in the last season, isn't it?
No, season 4.
Is it?
The penultimate season. It's a way in, though, yeah.
Yeah, it's very near the end.
Yeah.
I think about it quite like a lot, actually. The bit where the blood's running down outside where he is, and it's just completely silent. I weirdly think about that quite a lot about how tragic that was for him. And you get like a little hint of it here, how he just refuses to give the satisfaction of.
And I think that's about him being a survivor. The fact that this has happened before.
And also,
and what a defining part of his character that is.
Yeah, they also I can't remember if it was Sinclair or
Sheridan.
No, Sinclair or security Garibaldi, who were joking about Londo and Jakar getting married. I think it was Sinclair. And of course, given that one of the storylines is the whole death threat for Jakar, there's that. It sort of made me think about the fact that Londo and Jakar end up killing each other. But it is kind of like a marriage of souls in a way. They because by the end they're there for each other.
Yeah, well, they're bound together by their shared fate, and that is like a bonding. Of sorts.
But I just thought it was a really interesting foreshadow.
Yeah, it was. It was. Cool. Okay. Well, and also I've just got to say, you could call it corny, but I really like the ending as well. I like the sentiment of Earth's dominant belief system being diversity.
And big ups. They mention Maori.
Yes. Yeah.
So New Zealand. Woo!
Yeah, representing. I like the fact that they start with atheist. That's JMS right there.
Yeah.
He's like, we let's celebrate everyone's belief. I don't know. I don't know what I would imagine that J. Michael Straczynski is an atheist. If I
wouldn't have thought he's like super Roman Catholic or anything like that.
All right, that's it for now. We're back very soon with another episode of Babylon 5.
Take care.
Bye bye.